I'm a second generation whistleblower. My father blew the whistle on Idi Amin in 1971. I went to law school and uh, went to work for the SEC in Washington, regulating the money management industry. And it's in 1983, and over the last 40 years, I have blown the whistle many, many times to the SEC. I put together a timeline for you to show some of the many, many cases. But I went from the SEC to being legal counsel to one of the largest money managers in the world, and where I discovered that the people there were engaged in illegal trading, the senior management. So I reported. My first SEC whistleblower case was in 1988. And as you alluded to, but what's important is that from 1988 to 2012, I related dozens of cases to the SEC of illegal activity I was aware of because of my work in the industry. But throughout that period, there was no whistleblower program.
Well, I was just about to ask you that. So you were blowing the whistle before there was any profit incentive to blow the whistle.
Right. Because I was in the industry and being made aware of violations of law. So I would report them to the SEC, to former colleagues. But there was no, financial reward. There was, it was just I was doing the right thing for my clients. But you and I, often hear there's this criticism, whistleblowers are only into doing this for the money. They're in it for the money.
We both know that it's not true.
Yeah, it's not true. And the fact that I was doing this for decades before there was even a potential for money, I think is a real testament that people who are involved in whistleblowing usually are there out of moral conviction. And if there's money to be made, great, but that's not the prime motivation.
When you were giving all this information to the SEC, what was your day job exactly? What were you doing? You were working in private sector. What were you doing?
Well, initially, after I left, I was legal counsel to a large money management firm. Then I started my own investment firm with funding from mutual benefit life insurance company. So for the next 16 years, I did not practice law. I was in the investment business, and that's why I was able to see so much.
And what years did you work for the SEC itself?
1983 to 1986.
Okay, so you worked from 83 to 86 at the SEC, and what was your job there when you worked there?
I was an attorney in what's called an attorney advisor in finance, which means you have 1 foot in law and 1 foot in finance. And in the division of investment management, which is the division that regulates the money management industry.
All right. And you call yourself a forensic investment expert. That's sort of a broad term, right? So kind of narrow that down for us. Your focus, is it just pensions, or what was your focus? And then I'd like to talk about the SEC case that was so famous that you worked on, this $350 million banking case. Do you want to kind of tell us what a forensic investment expert does, and tell us maybe about your JP Morgan case?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. By the way, I want to mention my book, Who Stole My Pension, which I wrote with my good friend, Robert Kiyosaki, who you all may have heard, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
I have that book. And I also have your book. It's called Who Stole My Pension?
Yes.
And I guess you're going to tell us all about pension fraud.
Yeah. Well,
I've had many conversations with you about pensions. It's very scary to talk to you about pensions.
Well, the reason I mention it right now is because in the book I start by saying, what is pension forensics? And I explain, it's kind of like the show CSI Miami, where the show opens where there's a dead body and the investigators come in and their job is to determine whether the person died a natural death or was it due to unnatural causes, foul play.
Okay.
The work I do is I go in where there's a dead pension or a dead investment, and my job is to figure out, did it fail due to unforeseeable market forces, the market decline, it was just a bad investment, or was there foul play? Was there violations of law, conflicts of interest, hidden kickback schemes, whatever? And of course, in neither scenario, CSI Miami, or in my case, is nobody comes forward and says, I killed him with the candlestick in the drawing room or whatever. So you have to piece together what's happened, and you never have or rarely have access to all the documents. So you have to connect the dots. And the word forensic simply means that the work, the inquiry, the procedure is well enough based that it's acceptable in a court of law. So what I try to do in my forensic investigations of failed investments is to look at whatever information I can get, connect the dots, and come to an expert conclusion that will be acceptable in a court of law.
So I'm just curious, you say when a pension fails, I mean, I'm a bit of a novice when it comes to financial investigations. What does that mean when a pension fails? Do pensions often fail?
Well, thousands of pensions have been taken over by the PBGC, which is the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which is a U.S. Government agency. I've done the only forensic investigations ever of PBGC trusteed pensions.
Ted, what happens to the value of a pension when it fails? Do the pensioners, do the people who are members of the pension or the beneficiaries of the pension, do they get dollar for dollar? This agency that comes in and bails out, does it bail out the pension? Just describe what happens. We all kind of know about bank failures and the FDIC, but very few people know about pensions and the fund that you just mentioned that bails out pensions. What's that process look like when a pension fails and the person who that was his or her pension, what happens to those people?
Well, I worked on the only investigations of fraud and mismanagement in failed corporate pensions I've done, which involved the U.S. Airline Pilots Association pension fund. And then I also looked at United Airlines. But these are multi-billion-dollar plans. And, what happens is people don't get all the benefits they've been promised. They discover that the promises made are not promises kept. Some workers get all or most of their pension benefits. Other workers take a big haircut. So it's a big deal.
Did that happen in the case of U.S. Air or United? Did that happen to their pension?
Absolutely, yeah.
What happened?
In what the government's bailout scheme really protects benefits up to like $50,000 pension, around a number around that. And of course, a pilot is going to get paid a lot more than that. So the pilots took the biggest hit when the flight attendants did not, but the pilots would have taken the biggest hit when the pension got taken over by the U.S. government.
Oh, it's funny. I just Googled about the failure of the pension, and it took me to your Substack.
I'm the only one who's investigating them and these failures. And we actually met with the senior staff at the PBGC almost 20 years ago, I think 2006, offering to do investigations of failed plans. And we said to them, look, when a pension plan fails, there should be an investigation done to identify anybody who may have contributed to the demise of the pension, and the government should go after them for money they've looted from the pension. But the government told us then that they did not have any interest in recovering that money. In part because they didn't know what they would do with it. They didn't know who the money would belong to, and that's a little complicated to go into. But basically, if the government recovered money from the U.S. Air Pilots Pension Plan, from a money manager who'd stolen money from the U.S. Air Pilots Pension Plan, would that money go to the U.S. Air Pilots, or would that go into the government's coffers? They didn't know the answer to that. The law was unclear.
Well, what happened? I'm looking here. It was 2002 when the United Airlines pilots pension plan was terminated as part of the bankruptcy. So what happens in bankruptcy to your pension plan? When your airline goes bankrupt, what happens to your pension plan?
Well, your pension plan, the assets are separate, and so there's some time between if a corporation declares bankruptcy, and the pension plan continued on. Well, I was involved, I think in 2012, they hired me to do the investigation.
And what did you get hired to do exactly? Like, what was your mission when they hired you, and who hired you exactly?
I was hired by a group called USAPA, which is the U.S. Air Pilots Association union.
All right. So the pilots union hired you to
Yes.
look at the pension plan and why it failed.
Yes. And who was to blame, and who might they recover money from.
And what was the, how long did it take you to do that investigation, and what were the results of that?
It took about, I think, 3 months for the initial investigation, and then we had to go a little deeper. I think the whole thing took about 6 months.
That's in the world of investigations, 6 months is pretty quick. And what did you find? Like, what happened?
Well, what we found was that Wall Street firms had, looted the pension, and that what we find, I've done over $1 trillion in forensic investigations of failed pensions. And what you find is when pensions are starting to fail, they go for the Hail Mary. They take the most outrageous bets ever, thinking that they're going to make up the money that they don't have. And so that's what you see is in the last 5 years of a pension's life, they get into all kinds of garbage and toxic investments. And so when the government takes over, it's a portfolio full of garbage.